Welcome to the Resolute Warrior Podcast by Resolute Men Ministries.
Welcome to the Resolute Warrior Podcast. I'm very excited to have a good friend and my brother in Christ, Eric Braswell, with me. Eric is the Discipleship Pastor for Restored Church in Havre de Grace, Maryland. And Eric and I used to be part of that church together. And you know, we built quite a relationship, and we're going to expand about that in a few moments. But also Eric's position is a relationship coach or family strength trainer, if you will, with the WIN Family Health Group. Eric, welcome to the Resolute Warrior Podcast. Would you mind expanding a little bit about your position?
All right. Hey, Rob,
WIN?
thank you. Thank you, sir, for having me on here. And yeah, so basically what I do at WIN Family Health is that I'm a family strength trainer, and it's really a model of actually what's called structural family therapy. And what I actually do is that I teach families and individuals, both in and outside the foster care system and mental health areas, about communication intervention skills, parenting skills, relationship skills, and the actual different processes and core values that play along with that, to actually helping a person to be their best self in relationships and in life. Because if you don't have a solid set of values and standards, then no amount of skills or training will really take care of you really far, because your skills are supposed to match what's already in you, if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And so if there's certain things you don't believe or don't value, well, the skills won't work for you.
Yeah, well, that's excellent, man. And that's quite a position you had there. And what a blessing that I know personally. As I said, I know Eric, and what a blessing he is as a friend. So I can only imagine what the amazing things that you're doing through WIN. So this is a special podcast, Eric. You know, you and I talked about doing a podcast together, and well, here we are doing one. I wish we were kind of doing it more on some things that we
Right.
really wanted to conquer, about, some men-related issues. And I guess you could kind of say this does relate to men in a way, but, what's on your heart and my heart today is to talk about all the injustice that's going on within our country,
Right.
with the racial divide that we have going on. And so that's why we're doing a special podcast. We felt like it's important and it's timely to get this message out. And, look, man, I know you and I, we've gone back for quite a few years now, and we always had that special bond. But unfortunately, there's a lot of people out there that have trouble with relationships in regards to opposite, race, and it's quite disheartening. So what I wanted to do today, I should say what we wanted to do today, because Eric and I, like I said, we talked about putting something out there, is to kind of talk from your perspective and my perspective, to talk about these divides and what can we do to bring unity, at least in our world, in our community, even if it just be where we live, to do our part. So I really want to talk about this incident in regards to George Floyd and his death, this senseless death. And I wanted to kind of start our first question to kind of get your thoughts. What were your first thoughts when you heard about this news in regards to George Floyd, and what went through your mind and how did you respond when you first saw this?
Honestly, what happened was, what went through my mind is, okay, here we go again. Here we go again. And that is, I'm sure, probably what went through the minds of all the other Black people or people of color in America. And probably even went through the minds of, I would even probably say, through those that are white that care about the Black community. Here we go again. But with myself, what my first thought was that, wow, this has to stop. I mean, and then just as it started to news about it, and as it picked up, not only just in media but social media, and the Black communities just became more outraged, and so it just became apparent, just the weight of this particular situation. um it was like, uh-oh, might be the straw that broke the camel's back. And I think one of the things too was, when in seeing this, you know, with this young man, what happened to him, it's like, wow, will we ever be heard?
Mm.
Will we ever be heard? Will this ever stop? Will things always be like this? For this generation. Now, I do know as a believer that yes, the Lord, that there is going to come a time that the Lord will bring opportunity to resolve this. But at the time, I was thinking like, man, when is this going to stop?
Yeah.
And it was just really painful to see another member of the Black community treated unjustly and die unjustly at the hands of law enforcement.
Yeah, I know that's why I want to have these conversations today, because, I can have my perspective, you have your perspective, we both see the injustice in it.
Yeah.
But I have the why question just as much as you have the why question. Why did this happen? How could this happen?
Mm-hmm.
And it's our responsibility, through all this, as we're going through this injustice, we have to have compassion on our fellow man, like, even like, we'll get into about the riots and the looting that's all been going on, and how do we have compassion on individuals like that? Like, where are we
Right.
taking this? You know what I mean? It's just like, we understand the protest and support that. The voices need to be heard, and from both sides. Get out there and talk about it. But there's a balance through it all. And it kind of reminds me, like in Matthew 9:36. Jesus saw the crowds that were coming near him, and he had compassion on them. Even when he was weary and worn out. He was
Mm-hmm.
weary and worn out. They were like sheep without a shepherd, but yet he made sure he had compassion on them. And I think in a lot of ways, we're all kind of worn out. I know you got to be, that you're worn out from this. It's just like, here we go again, like you said, So what do you think the disconnect? Why do individuals, both sides, but I really want to hear your side. Why do you think some individuals fail to have compassion over this issue of racism and injustice? That's part one of the question. Because it seems like, we've all kind of turned a blind eye on this situation, right? So the second part would be that is, then what do we do? What do we do? First is the why. Why do we fail to have compassion, first of all, on this issue of racism and injustice? And then the next step is, what do we do?
Right. Okay, so I'm gonna answer your questions one at a time.
Go ahead.
So in regards to compassion, when we look at compassion, that's definitely a biblical term. So compassion and mercy pretty much are closely to the same thing. The non-biblical definition of that would be empathy.
Mm.
And why we see this happening, because empathy involves several things. First of all, it's being with people.
Right.
Can't be with people if I'm over there and you're over there when I'm hurting. That's one thing.
Mm.
Next is perspective taking. Empathy or compassion involves taking another person's perspective into consideration, and
Right.
and then feeling with them. So if I give somebody my glasses, they're seeing it now through my lens. And then another thing too is doing this without judgment.
Right.
Which is hard to do because everybody we're all naturally bent that way to judge and to prejudge. And then there's always these prejudgments, which we call prejudices, that stop us from helping, which really, that's still not an excuse. So then the thing of, how can I say, with another thing that's within empathy is connecting with people of what they're feeling. Once you put yourself in their perspective, you may not know their experience, but you know what it feels like to be rejected, to be mistreated, to be dishonored, to be ostracized. Everybody knows those specific feelings to some measure. All we're saying is that, yes, you might not have my experience, but be with me right here in my feelings.
Right.
And it takes courage to do that when it is somebody that does not look like you nor have your experiences.
Yeah. Yeah. That's well explained. And I think that's what we're lacking. A lot of it is, I'll be honest with you, coming from my side, I mean, it's just like when this all went down, I mean, I'm like, what do I do? Am I going to say the right thing? Am I going to say the wrong thing? Do I say something? Do I not say anything? And and it's just like, because when I first saw what happened to George, I was just like, how could this be? That this was a senseless act of violence, and and I know you're a strong supporter of the law enforcement. I am too, but but there's this, what, so I think that the challenge we run into, as I talk to some people, I think there's too much that we're trying to categorize, like it's all or nothing. It's just like, well, this is just how all people are over here, and this is just how all people are over there. It's not like that.
Right.
You got good and bad all around. You know what I mean?
Right.
And which is sad. But you said something pretty interesting. You said about having empathy. That to have the courage to understand. So this is kind of an off-topic question. To have that courage to understand is, what steps should we take to to build that sense of understanding so we can empathize better? What is missing?
Wow. That is really good, and that's really loaded. And so the first thing, that's one of the first things I can say that's probably missing is what you just did as a white man, especially a white Christian man, but a white man, is asking questions. What can I do? Like when me and you we caught up for the prayer meeting on Sunday, and your first thing was that, how you doing, man? Are you all right? Those are the type of things that Black people in this country are looking for. Check in and saying, and even going further and saying, hey, let's talk about this. Let's have some conversation around it, and start having conversations of, that where the other person is feeling heard. Because the reason why you see the protests is because people are not being heard.
Yeah.
The riots are happening because of people not being heard. Now, riots are wrong. Violence is wrong. Looting, setting things on fire, cop cars, violence of any kind is wrong. Right. But it's all of it is the fruit of not being heard. And so what you are doing right now in terms of coming to someone that's in the Black community and saying, hey, what do we do? What do I do? What do I want to do? What us as Black people, what we need, we want white people that we want you basically being straightforward, and you and I have had this conversation. We want white people to use your white privilege to stand with us and to say that racism is wrong.
Yeah.
And let's just call that what it is. Well, yeah, well, what about that happened over there and this happened over, and this wouldn't have happened? That's not being empathetic. That's actually apathy getting ready to show up, because now you're looking for justifications to not do it.
Yeah.
And that's sin.
That is sin. And you know what? That's great. I want to really, let's get into that. So what is apathy? Because I think a lot of times, I think people have a misunderstanding what it is. I know, but what is apathy, and how does apathy impact the Black community?
Yeah. So when we're talking about apathy, it's just really the opposite of empathy. That's really what it is. It's a lack of interest, a lack of care, a lack of concern, you know? And so what happens is that apathy in many instances becomes a defense mechanism. And my pastor said something yesterday in the message. A lot of times fear causes us to hide from our brokenness.
Yeah.
Fear does. And so now I am scared that if I get involved, it's going to show some stuff about me, or there's already some stuff about me that I know that needs to be put on the table and talked about and put some light on. And I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
And it might mean, and here's the thing is that apathy has a lack of interest towards the other person, a lack of concern, and it's more concerned about their interests, about there's no enthusiasm, there's no passion, there's no emotion for what the other person is feeling. That's apathy, you know? And so that's where we as Black people, we're seeing this. We've been seeing it. We've been seeing that that our men, you know, we've been seeing it for 100 years, for 400 years. And so to see this generation after generation, and this is passed down, this is what we see, that our needs are not being, our concerns are not being looked at in this area. You know, and I think now at this particular season, it's like you can't escape the injustice that this was wrong, you know. And does it, hear me say this, that does not mean that all of these other situations that are dynamics, like the rioting, the violence that's happening in response or as a reaction to the action that happened.
Yeah.
I think what happens a lot of times is that we want to deflect from what the main issue is. The main thing that keeps coming up is Black men keep getting killed, Black people keep getting killed by law enforcement. That's what we're seeing. This is what our experience is. And or we are treated unjustly within this system of systematic racism. And so what happens is that we're seeing it. And so we've already been voicing for over 400 years. We want this to stop. Right. We want the prejudice to stop. We want the lack of being, we want to be treated equal. Does this make sense? We want to be treated equal. We want to be viewed as equal. We want to be honored and given equal opportunities. But that has not happened. And so because our voice keeps going and it's still not happening, we need our white counterparts to use their white privilege to be the voice that can be an equalizer in this situation, that can be the voice of empathy and compassion so that justice can be produced, to be the voice of justice for us and with us, I should say that. Because for us and with us, when you're with us and behind our backs.
Yeah. Well, that's well explained, and I will tell you this. You know, yes, there's been a lot of injustice going on, but it just seemed like this one here. And I'm hoping. My hope is, being a man of God as you, that it seems like. Don't you feel like there's more discussion coming from this, latest incident than we've had in past incidents? So I'm kind of hopeful about that.
Me too.
And be honest with you, I think there's more conversations going on like you and I are having. You know what I mean? Opposite race, talking about this, not pointing fingers, but trying to find solutions. Yeah. And so I'm hopeful that conversations like we're having today will help turn the tide to a better place for all of us. And because, all men are created equal. And God makes that clear. He made, he says in Genesis 1:26, let's make man in our image, You know what I mean? He didn't say, let's make white man or black man in our image. He's saying man,
all of mankind,
all mankind, all
Mhm.
of us. And so I'm hopeful that we're beginning. That's my hope,
Yeah.
that we're beginning
Yeah.
to turn the tide. But I want to go back at a personal level, if that's okay with you,
Yeah.
because I mean, I'm sure. I know you and I, you talked about some, but but I'm sure there's been some situations that you would like to share that you've experienced, even as a child, or even as an adult. And there could be situations currently where you witnessed personally racism, and how did you address it, and how did that affect you, and how did you respond, if you will?
Yeah. So I can give you something that happened within the past year. I remember driving. I was driving on 40, and I remember the traffic was heavy, and it was I think it was a Thursday afternoon, and or driving from uh, Havre de Grace before I even, from Aberdeen on my way to Havre de Grace. And I remember I had to hurry up over in the lane because I saw this car that was driving too fast, and then it caused me in moving over and reacting. I had to hurry up and get out the way, and in doing so, I cut somebody else off.
Hmm.
And the guy I cut off was the guy in the pickup truck. He's a white man, and when I got to the stoplight, he pulled right up aside, right next to me, and said, "Hey, boy, if I were you, I wouldn't try that again. Okay, boy."
Mm.
In my mind, I was like, "I got your boy." But at the same time, I have to think logically to not give in to it, and not because it could have been easily escalated.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I have to think about the big picture. Got to get home to my wife and kids.
Yeah.
You know, got to get moving forward. You see what I'm saying? And
Oh, I
so
do.
these are the
Yeah.
types of things, though. That was something I could say that's happened within the last. There's been a few more,
Yeah.
but that's one within the past year.
Wow.
I definitely clearly remember, especially more growing up in Colorado, in the city of Colorado Springs. I remember just running home where I lived, the neighborhood where I lived at. My friends lived in Stratmore Hills, an area called Stratmore Hills, and they lived closer more towards the upper part of the hills, and I lived closer more towards down at the bottom of the hills.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would always go see my friends, and sometimes just walking at night, walking either to or from their house. I wasn't driving, I was walking, and get pulled over by the cops. Asking where am I going, and asking what my age is, and but when I was with my white friends, it was just, are you guys drinking? What are y'all doing together? It was just really just the regular routine thing. But when it was me, it was, we were saying without saying, what are you doing in this neighborhood?
Mm.
And so having those instances, jogging or running. I remember, like, I used to ride my bike and run a lot when I was a teenager. I loved running, but I love riding my bike too. I had to slow down, sometimes, like if I was running, not run too fast, not in certain neighborhoods, or I would have to slow down, or if I'm riding my bike, I would get these looks at first. And I would get these looks like, what are you doing in this neighborhood? Then I would not get those same looks if I had my white friends that actually lived in that neighborhood, and really in that neighborhood, there really weren't any blacks. And so it took a while for this to happen, for people to get used to seeing me. And so those are minor things. But as a kid, it's like, you're not feeling welcome. You feel like you should be able to ride your bike wherever you want. But as a kid, it's like, wow, I mean, like, what's wrong? What did I do?
Mm.
You know,
Yeah.
or in a store and you're being followed, and so as an adult, sometimes that happens. It's like, I have a job. I don't want your stuff. I'm not going to go steal a popsicle. That's dumb,
Mm,
you know? And so these are just really the type of things that it's really normal for us, that
yeah.
we don't always talk about on a day-to-day basis, that many of our white counterparts may not even know that we go through. You
Right.
know, different conversations have to happen when you have children, like my children, date outside of their race, outside of our race. And I'm fine with that. I have no problem with that at all, you know. Um, but there's conversations that have to happen, that, hey, make sure you introduce yourself to the parents before, you go over there. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Make sure you conduct yourself in a respectful way. Now normally that might be the conversation if it's anybody, if it's within their race, but particularly more, we're like, hey, just be careful when you go over there and make sure you're being respectful. You know, um, I know another thing, a conversation that's quite frequent in Black families is what to do if you get pulled over by the cops. I have to have these conversations with all of my children that drive, just not my sons, but my daughters. Keep your hand on the steering wheel where they can be seen at all times. Answer yes, ma'am, or yes, sir. Make sure that you have your license and your registration ready. Don't talk back. Just answer them whatever they need.
Right. Yeah.
So these are the things that you have conversations that are more on the area, on the side of being cautious. If we're going through a neighborhood, you know slow down, because you don't want you don't want to draw attention. If you're in the neighborhood, turn your music down, because you don't want to draw attention. But my white counterparts, they can go in with their music blasting and it's fine. They go through going a little fast and it's just fine.
Mm. Well, I appreciate you sharing some of the experiences that you went through. And, one of the key words I hear is, goes back to what you were talking about earlier is rejection, especially as a
Mm-hmm.
child. Like, why am I being rejected? So you start questioning things.
Right.
And then, as you became an adult, then you started figuring out okay, I get what's going on here,
Mm-hmm.
but, we want to make it clear to those who are listening that the discussions we're having today, we're here to try to help find solutions at some capacity in our world. What Eric's sharing is hard here. He's sharing these experiences to begin the solution process of what can we do to make change. And this is not by any means an attack on the police department, because both Eric and I have great friends within the police department. They're men of God that we absolutely love, and they're strong supporters of their work. It's just, there's a select few out there that, that we question the way they've handled some things. We talked about earlier about empathy. We talked about apathy. Now I want to talk about a little bit about sympathy, right? Because you and I know that's not going to help create change. Sympathy is not going to help create change to the racial injustice that we're experiencing. We talk about empathy as the key ingredient that is missing. We feel like, we got to have a greater understanding of this. So what keeps individuals, both sides, because this is both sides, I believe that we need to have some type of empathy towards each other to understand how I think. It's not like I'm trying to judge, you know what I mean? I just don't know how to handle it. And then I need to be empathetic to, hey, I'm not judging you either. I just need to understand exactly what you're going through and how can I help? So what helps keep us, I should say, from being empathetic to one another of the opposite race?
Well, one of the things that's definitely going to happen, that's going to help, is conversations like this. Conversations where both parties are coming together, whether it's blacks and whites or blacks and blues or law enforcement. It's going to take those conversations. Both people have to be willing to hear one another. First of all, the best way to do it, if you really mean business with this, is volunteer to have a conversation.
There you go.
Don't wait. Don't wait. Like the conversations I've been having, I've had a lot of conversations within the past week since last Sunday. All of them have been started by my friends or people I know that are white.
Mm.
All of them, including the one with you. You started the conversation. That's what we're looking for. This is what's going to make a difference. Take the initiative when you see people being treated unjustly. Take the initiative. Be like the Good Samaritan. He didn't go judging the guy. Well, you shouldn't have walked down that road, you know, and you wouldn't have got beaten up if you went down that road, would you? You know, no. He saw him because the other people that were just as the same race as the guy that was on the Jericho Road, one was a priest and one was a Levite. Both of them saw it and walked past. That's apathy.
Mm.
And so, but what you had with the Good Samaritan, who was known as an outsider of his own people, you know, to the Jews, he saw the guy and came, and he put him on his donkey, took him to an inn, and paid for it, and told the innkeeper, hey, if he needs anything else. Oh, and he poured on the oil and the wine. See, this is what's going to happen. You as a white man and any other white person that decides to stand with black people during this time, it's going to cost you something.
Yeah.
It's been costing us the whole time. So this is not a how can I say, this is not going to be a journey or a venture where nobody's going to be inconvenienced or be comfortable. People are going to be very inconvenienced and very uncomfortable. You may be very uncomfortable, but just your stance as a white man, using your white privilege it will make other white people feel uncomfortable.
Mm.
But I tell you what, it is the thing that is always going to that's going to be needed to produce justice. Because it just even on a kingdom level, when it comes to the kingdom of God, your true kingdom authority, spiritual kingdom authority, you won't have it if you don't take a stand for something.
Right.
You will be limited in operating in true kingdom authority if you do not stand for what you believe. And so the appeal, I'm saying this because of, if we are people of God's kingdom and we care anything about the kingdom of God in dealing with this, then true kingdom authority, because racism is a spiritual demonic power. I believe that.
Yes.
But it's rooted in two things: fear and pride.
Mm.
It's rooted in fear and pride. And so fear that, because that's what's been present since the garden. And so fear that I'm going to lose my position, my status, my place. So I must dominate over you.
Wow.
That's the fear part. The pride part is, I'm better than you, I'm more superior than you, so I must keep you in your place.
Mm.
And so these are two evils that must be dealt with. And yes, we need to pray, but we also need to be praying for what strategies we need to be carrying out. How, Lord, can I position myself to speak against the injustice and to be clear about it, just and to walk and to do like the Good Samaritan. And here's the thing, is that the racism and the racial injustice, I should say, in America is blatant. So, and it's obvious, and it takes the voice of white people to stand against it. That voice needs to be equally obvious. Black people don't need to be guessing who's with them and in their corner.
Yeah.
I hope that makes sense.
Oh, it makes perfect sense. You know, it kind of goes back to what we're talking about earlier. You know, trying to understand each other. We're talking about the empathy. You know, to understand how I operate, so I can understand how you operate. You know, I just had a conversation the other day. I talked to Tier Screen, who who is in Woodlands, Texas, and he puts a lot of uh, I should say, he puts a lot of material out there for men's issues to help them understand how to be a man of faith, how to understand how to deal with anger, deal with lust, deal with all these different things that men struggle with. And we had this conversation, and he said something enlightening to me. He goes, we should be welcoming understanding each other's cultures, because, it would be quite boring. You know what I mean?
It is.
It'd be, we should be almost like so welcoming, like, hey man, I never looked at it from that perspective, and that's
Yes.
pretty cool, and
Yes.
you know what I mean? And we find out, we're not boring after all. You know what I mean? We all have something that we could give each other, and that's the body of Christ. And so that really kind of enlightened me in a lot of ways. It's just like, yeah, it's a culture difference, and that's all it is. It's, we say it's color, but it's the way we operate culturally. But, but when God created us all, and I want you to quickly expand, I don't want to get too long on this, but you said something the other day that I think is extremely important for everybody here. Both you and I being Christians, we talked about the different tribes, if you will. Could you expand a little bit? You talked about the tribe of Ham. You talked about, talking about, like God created diversity and unity at the same time. Could you expand a little bit about that?
Yeah, and what we were talking about, and if you want more information on this, I just refer you to Dr. Ken Ham. In his he has a website. It's called Answers in Genesis, and he has a book that's called the same thing, Answers in Genesis. But one of the things that that when you read the book, but looking at it from a scientific perspective, and I'm by no means any scientist, but just even looking at things in the Bible, it just makes sense. But because what happened is that with Noah, where all the different races came from, with Noah, he had through his kids, he had in his loins, so to speak, all the different people groups that we have today in the earth. And when he had 3 sons, he had Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Shem means olive, and this is where you get people that are from Semitic descent. This would be people that are Jewish and of Arab descent. Then you have Ham, which would be people that are black, that are African descent. And then you would have Japheth. These would be people that we would call white or of European descent. But after the flood, where people, the society lived in a town, in the place called Babel. And in Babel, they built a tower. And God said, oh, the people are one, and the language was one, and the people are one. So there was extreme unity. But also what people are failing to realize is that that was the only society on the earth at that time. So there was one society. Yet within that one society, there was no racism. And the people, what happened was that there were people in terms of color, there were people that were from extremely light to extremely dark. Yet they were all one society and spoke one language. And when they tried to build that tower up to God, which was a bad idea, God confused the different languages. And so people went, people that were of African descent pretty much stayed and migrated probably in that area, or migrated further south. People that were of fair skin or light migrated up north. And this would describe also the reason why we all have different physical attributes. And then you have the people that, that would be considered that descended from Shem, and they stayed there within the area or went to the areas where we would call the Mideast. And so, and then all the other languages, all the other people groups that happened in that time, that were a part of that, they went to different parts of the earth and they started to spread. So that's basically where all of that came from when you're looking at it from a biblical perspective. All of the different tribes and different languages and different people in the earth. And people went first to because the first key to survival is communication, and people went with people that spoke just like them. So this is how people broke off into those groups. Then people naturally gravitated to people that looked just like them because there was a whole language change.
Yeah.
And so went with people that spoke your language, and then people that looked like you. And then this is how people broke off into different groups, different people groups, different ethnicities.
Wow, that was amazing when you shared that the other day, because I didn't know that. I like to say this man I'm talking to is a biblical scholar. He'd probably be telling me like, I wouldn't go that far, Rob, but to me he is. I mean, he is such. I feel like I know nothing out of the Word of God after I talk to this guy.
Oh,
but
gosh,
I tell you right now, I'm just being real, man. I mean, you know the Word. But that really helped me out because it was, that really opened my eyes in a lot of ways, how God created us. And, so we have to be very, very careful when we start judging people. And it's just not judging people of color, but when we judge people's actions, we have to be very careful when we do that, because we're all God's creation. We're all one in Christ. Right. So when we say we hate our brother, our fellow man, we're actually hating. If I'm correct me if I'm wrong here, we're showing hatred towards the God that created us.
Yeah, because we're in the image of God. Yeah. The Bible is very clear on that. In the book of James, he says, "How can you, speak out of your mouth, when we say we out of the mouth we bless God, but then we curse man or other people who are made in the very image of God." And he said, brothers, these things ought not to be. And I think what is important really as believers, if you're a believer, that if you're white, black, or blue, somebody that's in law enforcement, taking this from a biblical Christ-centered perspective, learn how to weep with those who are weeping. Yeah. Because what black people have felt is that nobody's been doing that. People know how to rejoice from time to time when we rejoice, but we've been feeling that nobody knows how to weep when we're weeping. Looking at it again from a biblical perspective, and I want to say this, first of all, I'm going to be very clear. When it comes to cops or those who are in law enforcement, police, members of the law enforcement, if somebody does something wrong against them, it is wrong. It is just dead wrong.
That's right. Yeah.
It is just as wrong as when a law enforcement officer does something towards a black person.
Right.
That is unjust.
Right.
And so with saying that, it is important that when we are talking about this, because what happens a lot of times when we start talking like this, somebody will pop up and say, well, all lives matter. Right? And what that does, that's a form of apathy showing up. And they're not even realizing what they're saying. They're contradicting themselves, because if all lives matter, then you would be concerned about that one piece of the whole that's actually in crisis.
Yeah, that makes sense. It makes sense. Let me just kind of expand on that, because what I kind of envision, it's almost like, I don't know why I come up with this, like if you have a barrel full of water, right? And you have several leaks in it, right? But you only plug 90% of those leaks and you leave the one running, there's still a problem. It's still leaking. What I mean? So, we have to look at it, we have to resolve the whole issue and not just part of it.
Right.
Yeah, so I get what you're saying there. That makes a lot of sense.
Right. And because what we cannot do is minimize other people's issues.
Right.
And that's what blacks have been feeling. And so this is why when people throw this out there, blue lives matter, or or all lives matter, it's not being well received within the black community, because, okay, but what about this first? Because this happened first. We want to believe that blue lives matter or all lives matter, but nobody's mattering that we matter. And when I say all Black Lives Matter, I'm not talking about the organization. I want to be clear on that one. I'm talking about the concept and the idea that the life of a Black person actually matters.
Mm.
It's separate from the organization.
Gotcha. Yeah.
You know, so I want to make that distinction, because I don't know anything about people that's in the group that's in that particular organization.
Well,
But
let me
that
just say
there's no
this.
misunderstanding, because this is where
Yeah.
people are getting scared at,
Right.
and they find themselves not knowing what to say or not knowing what to do,
Right.
because they feel like they might be supporting something instead of supporting someone.
Gotcha.
And what we want is that we want support. The Black community itself we want our lives to matter to white people.
That's good. That's good. And you know what? I want to expand on that, because this is why we have these conversations,
Yeah.
because you're helping me out. Because when you say that, you're talking about, I'm not talking about the organization per se. I'm talking about the care of an individual per se, you know, so that just, and the only way we're going to get resolution is to have these conversations.
That's the only way, is
You know,
having these
to
conversations.
resolve this issue,
Right.
we had to have these conversations. So I want to go, we only got a few more questions left, but I really want to talk about a few things here that, you know, so, you know, from the biblical perspective, or even as leaders, whether you be, you know, a believer or not, what steps as parents and leaders do we need to take, I should say, to be change agents within our sphere of influence to help us turn this racial injustice around? What can we do?
I believe, yeah, thank you. That's a really good one. I think a start is to have conversations in the home, in the household, in the home, and helping our children, helping our relatives to understand what is compassion and empathy, and teaching them the importance of it, teaching them when to know when it's present and when to know when it's not, and talking to them about what is justice. Justice is throughout the whole Bible, especially in the book of Proverbs. You know, here's something that Jesus said. He said, woe unto you scribes, Pharisees, and hypocrites. In Matthew 23 says this, because you tithe mint and cumin and frankincense, but you omit and you forget about the weightier matters of the law, which is love, God's love, compassion, and justice. These things you should have done, and then not left the other undone. Yeah. And so teaching these things about the love of God, and then that aspect of love that's called compassion, being more specific, because this is where it's really needed, knowing where to put the compassion and the mercy, the empathy, targeting the area. This way we won't allow the distractions and the deflection of statements like, well, all lives matter. Of course, all lives matter. But if you really meant that statement, then you wouldn't be saying it, because you would say, hey, this particular people group over here that are in crisis, their life matters. Yeah. And so going through that and helping your kids to learn, teaching children to stand for what is right and for what is just, teaching children to be unbiased in how they're viewing things. Because one of the things, if you know, that's important, that you're doing when you're doing this, is that you're teaching children discernment. Discernment that is rooted in love, and not false discernment that's rooted in fear. Because there's a true discernment, and then there's a counterfeit false discernment, which is rooted in fear. Yeah,
right. No, that's good. That's good. I mean, that's important stuff, you know, and I know this all falls, what you just shared too, is, you know, there may be some kids who are, you know, are not getting that kind of influence that you just discussed, you know, with these conversations within the home. And some parents probably don't even know how to have these conversations. So, we as believers, we know the church has a responsibility in this as well. Don't you think?
Yeah. Yeah, I think the church does have a responsibility in this, but we can only take we can't do everything that the family is supposed to do.
That's right.
So we have to have the support of the whole family, or mom and dad, or whoever is in the house. The church is to be a place of resource. A source and resource where you can come, get the goods, and go home and play it out every week.
There you go.
The goal, or the responsibility of fivefold ministers is to empower or equip the saints for their work of service, so that the body of Christ may be edified. And to do that until we all come into the unity of the faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God, into a mature man, or a mature group body of believers.
Yeah, that's really good. That's really good. I only got 2 questions left for you, Eric, but I really want to hit on this, because this to me, and I know you're going to agree, that this runs deeper than color, right? So Paul reminds us in the book of Ephesians, particularly in chapter 6, verse 12, he says that the issues, he kind of expands on the issues run deeper than flesh and blood, because he says this, that our battle is not against flesh and blood, but it's against the rulers, against authorities, against the powers of darkness, against spiritual forces of evil in the heavens. So now that we recognize if that's the origin, how do we attack this from a biblical or spiritual perspective? How do we as believers attack it from a biblical or spiritual perspective?
So yeah, glad that's really good. So I would say definitely first would be praying, and going into spiritual warfare. But I want to say this before we can attack the spirit of racism and fear and pride and bigotry that's out there. We have to pull down the strongholds of those very same things in here within us. Because he says, Paul talks about pulling down strongholds in 2 Corinthians chapter 10. He talks about, he says that the weapons of our warfare, they're not carnal, but they are powerfully divine through God to pulling down strongholds. And he said, casting down imaginations and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, and capturing every thought and make it obey Christ. Then he says this, having in a readiness to revenge all disobedience when your obedience is fulfilled. The reason why sometimes spiritual warfare may not work for many believers is because they haven't dealt with that same issue in their own heart. And the Bible says, don't give place to the devil. So how can you take authority over something when that in your heart, that thing has authority over you?
Amen.
So that would be the first place. Deal with the racism, deal with the prejudice, deal with the apathy and the lack of compassion and the fear and pride that you may have in your own heart. Then now you can stand courageously and deal and stand in unity with other believers. And then I would say too, another aspect of which I think is a very, very divine strategy is just loving on people. Again, this thing of compassion towards people. That will change, because the ability to shift and get people to change their perspective is going to come through these aggressive acts of compassion and justice and love, and just being empathetic and being there with people in their need, in their difficulty, in their place of hurt.
Well, that's really good. I mean, that's really good. So I knew I wanted to get that out, my man, because I knew that that we really have to see things deeper than what we see on the outside. There's a battle that's going on that in the realms around us, and even in us.
Mm-hmm.
Like you shared, it could be, that battle could be within. We
Mm-hmm.
talk about, that's like where addictions start there, mental issues, things like that. It's all spiritual. And
Mm-hmm.
and this can't be neglected as something that's not spiritual either. It's a
Right.
battle of the spiritual realm. So what can we do as spiritual leaders to help begin the process of bringing peace and wisdom to this whole situation of injustice and racism?
Yeah. And I'm gonna just probably just, even with that question, I'm gonna reiterate what I was just sharing earlier. It's going to start with having conversations in the home.
Okay.
Because if it's not being done in the home, it's not going to be effective in the community. It's not going to be effective in a larger space either. And so addressing things, like one of the things my wife and I, we do is that if we hear our kids say something out of line about another race, no, we're not having that. And being honest about it.
It's good.
Don't let that stuff slide, because they'll take that stuff out and it becomes habit of them saying it. Oh, well, just being straight honest. Well, they can say, oh, well, that's just what white people do, or that's just what Black people do, or just, within my family, they're Black, Latino, and Caribbean. So it's like, that's just what they do. That type of talk has to stop, has to be shut down. And so starting on that angle, because we don't want to be hypocrites saying we want justice, or we want to do justice or receive justice, but yet we're entertaining this stuff in the background.
Right.
And so that is, and then carrying out into another spectrum, which is within the community, and with us, it may look like church or other nonprofits that we work with, we're a part of, playing it out in those areas and saying, what can we do to rally around this people group? Because if it was just like, if it's Black lives that matter right now in this moment, listen, when the time comes and when it gets real heavy for those that are in law enforcement, those same conversations, we got to do that over. We can't show favoritism.
Yeah.
But we do need to bring the justice and the compassion right in those spots where it has been cyclical and systematic throughout generations. We need to bring it there.
Yeah.
And not but, and that's because that's where the problem is that we say, but we got to do this too. We can do all of them at the same time. We got to learn how to love everybody in their stuff at the same time. Yet at the same time, without minimizing the one that's the root issue, without minimizing the root issue.
Yeah.
And that's what we don't want to do, because the enemy wants to deflect. He wants to minimize somebody else's experiences. He wants to downplay it. Or just say, oh, well, get over it. You've been doing it. You guys have been like this for 400 years and you ain't got it together yet. See, that's minimizing. And these are the thoughts. So I'm throwing it out there because these are the conversations that people are having in their heads, even though they may not say it to me or anybody else that's Black.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Makes total sense. What kind of came to mind is like the body of Christ. Everybody has their members in different parts. The body has all these different parts for the one function, right? Mm-hmm. So like I look at it from a physical standpoint too. If I bust my hand open and I'm bleeding,
right,
I don't ignore it. I don't ignore it just because, well, the rest of me's fine. You know what I mean? Right. I have to address that issue. And I tell you, my man, I said, these conversations need to continue. And I so appreciate you. I so appreciate your time and sharing your heart and just kind of just opening up about the challenges you went through. It helps me understand some things. I'm going to give you a moment to kind of just give your closing thoughts on some things. But, what came to my mind is, some things that we covered today is, understanding empathy over apathy. We understanding cultural differences, understanding God's creation, the order and how he created through the different tribes, through Noah, understanding the spiritual battles that are involved. All this only took place is because we had conversations. You know what I mean?
That's it. That's it.
And that's the key thing. So with that, what do you have to share before we close out today?
I want to do two things. I want to piggyback off of what you just said, because in doing this, it's going to take having conversations, being volunteer to have a conversation, take the initiative before you're asked. That's the first thing. If somebody else has to ask and you're willing to do it, that's great. But have the conversation. Next, come with a whole lot of humility, both parties, black, white, black, blue, whoever. Come with humility and come with being able to put down justifications and defensiveness and a willingness to hear one another humbly, to hear one another generously, and to be able to communicate our fears, our concerns, our needs, and just those things, and being honest about it. And so doing that back and forth is what's going to be important. And then coming up with a strategy or a plan in how to build this bridge and to be a place of peace and healing. And so with that, I just want to say this with this verse from Habakkuk, chapter 1, verse 3. And this is what God is saying to Israel. He says, "Why do you force me to look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing? Oppression and violence are right in front of me." In other words, you're letting this stuff go on, and it's right in front of me. He says, "Strife is ongoing and conflict escalates." And he says this is the clincher. "This is why the law is ineffective and justice never emerges." This is why, no matter things that are happening in Washington and on a government level, in whether it's local, state, or federal, why it doesn't work. Because in the major injustices, which is the systematic racism that's already happening, it's never been corrected. And he says, "This is why the law is ineffective and justice never emerges. For the wicked restrict the righteous. Therefore, justice comes out perverted."
Wow.
And so with that, I want to say is that have a heart for compassion and justice. And you can love you can love blacks, you can love law enforcement, and you can love whites all at the same time. Just knowing how to have discernment and to hold it, and knowing what not to minimize. Don't minimize what somebody's feeling, but know how to prioritize the crisis or the issue that's serious in the moment.
Amen. I couldn't wrap that up better myself. And so there you have it. A special edition of the Resolute Warrior podcast with Discipleship Pastor Eric Braswell. Eric, my man, I love you. These conversations, like we said, need to continue.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you so much for
You too,
allowing
man.
your vulnerability to be
Thank
open
you.
and to express these concerns and how to address them. We didn't come on here to make a complaint session. We came here with strategy.
Right.
And that's one thing I love about this guy. There's always strategy with every conversation we have. It's just not like it's just not like dead air. We're gonna talk, but we're gonna understand. We're gonna have these conversations so we can form some type of strategy to bring some resolution to resolve these issues that we're dealing with. So Eric, thanks for coming on the Resolute Warrior podcast.
Thank you.
I love you, man.
Thank you for having me, bro.
All right, take care. God bless.
All right, you too.
You
God
can
bless.
connect with Resolute Men on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Men, stay focused and determined. Fight the good fight. Live for something bigger than yourself. And be a resolute warrior.